Imagine a warm July afternoon in 2008 on Ditch Plains Beach in New York, where the tide carried in something that would haunt the local community for years to come. At first, it looked like another piece of ocean wreckage, the kind of thing storms and currents drag in from far beyond the horizon. But when people moved closer, the atmosphere changed. A small crowd gathered around a carcass that did not seem to belong to any familiar animal. It was roughly the size of a large dog, but its skin looked hairless and leathery, stretched in a way that made it seem less like a dead body and more like a mistake. Its face appeared especially unnatural. Where people expected a snout, they saw something more like a beak, and beneath it, sharp teeth jutted outward in a way that felt deeply wrong. As police arrived to move people back and break up the crowd, the beach no longer felt like a summer beach at all. The air itself seemed tense, heavy with a collective dread nobody could explain. Word of the thing spread fast. Photos raced across the internet. News crews came down to Suffolk County from local stations, then regional networks, then national outlets. Reporters stood in the wind with the ocean behind them, repeating the same question. What exactly had washed ashore in Montauk? Was it a deformed animal? A biological accident? Or was it something that had never been meant to leave the place it came from? Most people tried to remain rational. They said it was probably a raccoon or a coyote whose body had been altered by salt water, decomposition, scavengers, and the slow violence of the Atlantic surf. That explanation sounded sensible enough. Seawater strips bodies. Hair falls away. Features collapse. Skin tightens. But to many who saw the photographs, rationality felt strangely thin. Others began whispering about the nearby Plum Island Animal Disease Center, wondering whether some secret experiment had slipped beyond containment. Yet there were also residents who reacted in a different way entirely. They became guarded, evasive, and pointed away from Plum Island and farther up the coast. They directed attention toward Camp Hero. To outsiders, Camp Hero was just an abandoned military facility at the eastern edge of Long Island, a place of rust, concrete, fences, and wind. To those residents, however, it was something else. They spoke of it like a wound, a stain, a place where terrible things had been done under the cover of national security, then buried beneath official silence. Some warned reporters not to go poking around, and some said only that whatever had happened, there was never supposed to come into the light. If you follow the coastline out to the tip of Long Island, you eventually reach the remains of this base, its cracked concrete structures watching the sea like blind sentries. Camp Hero dates back to the height of World War II. It was originally constructed in 1942 to protect local maritime traffic from the constant threat of German U-boats moving through the Atlantic. On paper, its purpose was defensive and straightforward. But even in those early years, the base carried a theatrical layer of deception. Military planners went to unusual lengths to conceal what the site really was. Massive bunkers were painted with fake windows and doors. Decorative chimneys were added. From a distance, parts of the installation were meant to resemble an ordinary fishing village, rather than a hardened defensive complex. Secrecy was built into Camp Hero from the beginning. After the Axis powers surrendered, the base was briefly closed. But with the beginning of the Cold War, the site was reactivated and renamed the Montauk Naval Air Station. Its new purpose was to function as part of an early warning network, watching the skies for the threat of Soviet bombers and possible nuclear attack. At the center of this role was a radar dish, rising above the coastline like a machine built for something larger than observation. The structure dominated the landscape. It looked less like a tool and more like an eye. By the early 1980s, the military officially moved to decommission the base. The radar system was no longer central to defense in the same way it once had been. Yet, some details of the closure never quite sat right with later observers. The towering radar dish, for example, was left standing, Officials said it remained in place because it served as a useful landmark for shipping. Buildings were abandoned, portions of the property fell into disrepair, and eventually the Parks Authority fenced much of it off. For many years, that might have been the end of the story. Camp Hero could have faded into the background of local history, but in the late 1990s, a man named Preston Nichols stepped into public view with claims so strange and so extreme that they transformed the base from a forgotten military ruin into the center of one of America's darkest modern legends. Nichols began giving interviews and promoting books in which he described a hidden history of Camp Hero that went far beyond radar tracking or coastal defense. According to him, the base had been covertly used by intelligence agencies for a secret series of experiments that later became known in conspiracy culture as the Montauk Project. He described it as something he had personally been part of, a failed program concealed beneath the official closure of the base. In his telling, the military had not simply shut down operations and left. It had gone underground. Nichols alleged that beneath Camp Hero lay a hidden network of laboratories and chambers, where experiments had been carried out on mind control, psychological manipulation, trauma-based conditioning, psychic abilities, and eventually even time travel. He claimed the project was tied to deeper currents in post-war American intelligence, especially the recruitment of former Nazi scientists under Operation Paperclip. That real historical program, which brought German scientists to the United States after World War II, became in Nichols' version not just a transfer of technical expertise, but the pipeline through which darker knowledge entered the American system. In his account, those scientists did not arrive carrying only rocketry or military engineering. They brought methods, cruel methods, knowledge of how trauma could fracture memory, how drugs and frequencies might alter human perception, how fear could be weaponized, and how the human mind might be broken down and rebuilt. Nichols claimed many of these figures or their successors ended up connected to work at Montauk. There, hidden below the surface, they allegedly pursued research into mind control, interdimensional travel, and technologies so far beyond public science that they sounded like science fiction even when spoken aloud. The most famous thread in this mythology connects Montauk to MK Ultra, the real and well-documented Central Intelligence Agency program that explored mind control, drugs, hypnosis, and psychological experimentation. Nichols insisted that what became public in Senate hearings was not the whole story, but only a small, visible fragment of something much larger. In his telling, Montauk represented a continuation and escalation of that work. The experiments were no longer limited to drugs or suggestion. They involved high-frequency electromagnetic transmissions, brutal abuse, sensory manipulation, and memory suppression. Nichols said his own awareness of the project did not return all at once. Instead, it began with strange encounters during the 1980s. People he had never met would approach him in public and insist he had been their boss at Montauk. At first, he dismissed them as unstable or mistaken, but too many of them told similar stories, and he began to suspect that something had been erased from his own past. Driven by that suspicion, he returned to Camp Hero. He later described being allowed inside the fenced area by a caretaker. And as he walked through the abandoned structures, he claimed the place began to act like a trigger. He began recalling hidden staircases, elevators, and subterranean passageways that should have been there. When he searched for them, he found places that appeared to have been filled with concrete, as though access points had been deliberately sealed. Looking up at the giant radar dish, Nichols said he suddenly remembered that it had served a second purpose beyond surveillance. According to his account, it had been used to broadcast powerful frequencies over the surrounding region, affecting mood, perception, and behavior in the nearby population. The dish, in this theory, was not merely a radar instrument. It was part of a field experiment. Nichols later claimed there was anecdotal support for these ideas. He said one police officer remembered periods when the dish was seen rotating, and the town would fall into episodes of strange behavior. people reportedly stood still as if frozen in a trance, while others suffered headaches, nosebleeds, confusion, or blackouts. None of this amounted to formal proof. But in legend building, repeated fragments are often enough to give shape to a hidden world. The darkest part of the Montauk story, however, concerns not the town, but the children. Nichols and other later speakers claimed that local youths and runaways were brought into the underground levels of Camp Hero to be used as test subjects. They were allegedly selected because they were vulnerable, difficult to trace, or easy to discredit. According to these claims, the project was trying to unlock psychic abilities through extreme trauma, deprivation, and conditioning. The children were said to be starved, beaten, isolated, drugged, and subjected to electromagnetic exposure. The goal, according to the legend, was to create remote viewers, human weapons, and individuals able to project consciousness beyond the body. This idea became one of the most enduring elements of the myth, because it fused cold institutional cruelty with supernatural ambition. As Nichols published more material, skepticism followed closely behind. Readers were divided. Over time, Nichols himself admitted that certain fictional elements had been incorporated into his books, a confession that damaged his credibility in the eyes of many. Yet strangely, the admission did not kill the legend. Once a story enters the bloodstream of conspiracy culture, weakness does not always destroy belief. Sometimes it simply changes its form. Other men came forward with their own accounts. James Bruce and Stuart Swerdlow were among those who claimed that they too had regained memories of being taken to Camp Hero and experimented on. They described abuse, psychological conditioning, psychic training, and military handlers observing their performance. They became associated with the idea of the Montauk Boys, a supposed group of children used as expendable tools in a hidden program. Their testimonies overlapped enough with Nichols' version to deepen the mythology, even as critics argued the overlap could be the product of suggestion and repetition. Then the story expanded again. It absorbed portals, time travel, and creatures emerging from failed experiments. That expansion may explain why the Montauk Monster later fused so easily with Camp Hero in public imagination. Once you already have a legend involving underground labs, mind control, and creatures emerging from hidden programs, a grotesque carcass washing ashore feels less like an isolated oddity and more like a message from that buried world. The ocean, in this reading, did not bring in a random body. It delivered an echo. In the mythology of Montauk, the final cleanup was total. Lower levels were sealed. Memories were wiped. Subjects were released back into ordinary life, carrying no conscious knowledge of what had been done to them. Yet the site itself, according to believers, could never be fully erased. Too much of it remained. Too much of it still leaked into the present. Modern explorers, urban legends say, have found hints that something lies beneath Camp Hero even now. Geological surveys have been cited as evidence of tunnels and hollow chambers under the ground. Explorers claim to have found sealed stairwells, buried vents, and suspiciously reinforced areas hidden by vegetation. Even the legal language surrounding parts of the land has drawn attention, with some people arguing that only the surface is clearly under park authority, while what lies below remains more ambiguous. To believers, these are not quirks of bureaucracy. They are clues. Locals have also reported from time to time that the great radar dish appeared to move long after it should have been inactive. Some say they saw it rotating at night. Some insist that when it moved, the old symptoms returned. Nausea, headaches, unease, the feeling that the air itself had changed. Such reports are anecdotal and impossible to verify cleanly after the fact. But again, Montauk has never depended on clean verification. It survives in the space where strange architecture, historical secrecy, half-remembered stories, and impossible claims begin to overlap. There is also something about the setting itself that keeps the story alive. Even people who know nothing of the legend can stand near its old structures and feel that peculiar sensation created by abandoned military spaces, the sense that decisions were made there which ordinary people were never meant to understand. Concrete bunkers, empty corridors, wind moving through rusted barriers, the giant dish facing the sky. The place already feels like a secret before a single story is told about it. A normal hoax burns brightly and then dies. But a legend tied to real history, real military secrecy, real intelligence programs, and a landscape that looks built for concealment, can endure far longer. Every new strange event in the area becomes fuel. Every unexplained structure becomes evidence. Every washed-up carcass, every locked gate, every ambiguous legal document becomes another thread in the tapestry. The more extravagant the claims become, the easier they are for critics to dismiss. Time travel, interdimensional portals, monsters emerging from engineered ruptures, psychic warfare, memory erasure on a mass scale. To many people, this is simply too much. Yet for believers, that excess is the point. If such a project ever existed, they argue, it would have sounded insane from the outside, because insanity is the shield behind which the most disturbing truths sometimes hide. Perhaps that is why Montauk remains compelling even now. It is not merely a story about secret government activity. It is a story about the fear that modern institutions can sink deeper than the public imagination allows, and that when they do not simply hide weapons or documents. They hide damage. Human damage. Psychological damage. Damage to memory itself. The idea that children may have been used, broken, and discarded in pursuit of forbidden knowledge is what gives the legend its deepest emotional force. Even the Montauk Monster, whether it was a decomposed raccoon, a coyote, or something else entirely, fits into this emotional structure perfectly. The carcass on the beach dragged the old myth back into daylight. It gave people an image. Legends need images. Without them, they remain abstract. With them, they become contagious. There are historical pieces that are real. Camp Hero was real. Its wartime purpose was real. The radar installation was real. Operation Paperclip was real. MK Ultra was real. Government secrecy around defense and intelligence programs was real. Once those pieces are on the table, the leap into darker possibilities becomes easier for many minds to make. But the full Montauk Project, with all its most extreme claims, remains in a different category. It lives in testimony, legend, repetition, inference, and the strange durability of stories people do not want to let go. That does not make it meaningless. In some ways, legends reveal as much about a culture's hidden fears as confirmed history does about its documented actions. Montauk speaks to fear of institutions, fear of science without morality, fear of children being used by systems meant to protect them, fear of memory itself being altered, and fear that what is hidden beneath the surface may not stay hidden forever. As more archives are opened and more fragments of the 20th century continue to emerge from secrecy, the line between the plausible and the impossible does not always grow clearer. Sometimes it grows stranger. Sometimes official history expands just enough to make old rumors feel less absurd than they once did. That is where Montauk continues to live. Not in certainty, but in that charged borderland between documented secrecy and expanding myth. Perhaps one day there will be a definitive answer about what happened beneath Camp Hero. Perhaps there will not. Perhaps the radar dish will remain only a relic, and the tunnels beneath the earth, if they are there, will turn out to be far more ordinary than the stories suggest. Or perhaps the legend endures because a completely ordinary explanation has never managed to satisfy the atmosphere surrounding the place. What makes the Montauk story so difficult to forget is not that every claim has been proven. It is that the most disturbing claims were never cleanly buried either. They remain half alive, circling through books, interviews, and whispered conversations, waiting for the next strange image to pull them back into public view. And that may be the real power of Montauk. Not simply the idea that something impossible happened there, but the sense that if something did happen, the truth was broken apart on purpose and scattered among ruins, rumors, and damaged memories. A washed-up creature, a silent base, a giant dish facing the sky, children who may or may not have been taken, scientists who may or may not have pushed beyond the line, stories that sound too large to believe, yet refuse to disappear. The world is full of dark corners like that. Places where history ends, rumor begins, and the human mind keeps searching the gap between them. From unexplained disappearances to unidentified bodies, from remote lights seen in wilderness to legends rooted in old military ground, such stories endure because they challenge the comfort of clean explanations. They remind us that mystery is not always distant. Sometimes it stands on a public beach in daylight. Sometimes it waits behind a fence. Sometimes it survives because no one has ever been able to shut the door on it completely. Whether the Montauk Project was a hidden operation, a growing folklore built from fragments of truth, or some uneasy mixture of both, one thing is certain: its shadow has reached far beyond the edge of Long Island. It has entered popular culture, modern mythology, and the fears of people who have never even seen Camp Hero. That is not the mark of an ordinary rumor. That is the mark of a story that found a weakness in the imagination and never let go. And if the witnesses, the whistleblowers, and the locals were even partly right, then the most unsettling possibility is not merely that secret experiments were imagined there. It is that some secrets are capable of reshaping the world around them long after the official files have gone silent.